there's complicating factors to the way that comics marketing works because there's complicating factors to the way comics work. The way that you promote a book, graphic novel, is going to be completely different than the way that you would promote a single issue series, because like they operate on complete different timelines. You're targeting different people. I mean, like, I honestly think one of the biggest complicating factors that people don't talk about externally when they're roasting comics marketing is the fact that, like, how do you create a direct response where you're trying to actually generate action in customers when they can't buy it until 3 months after it's announced? Like, that is such a complicating thing, and something I'm sure you've run into many times in your job.
Hi, my name is Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders, a weekly podcast where it is my privilege to talk to the people behind the scenes of the comic book industry, the people who make it run, the people who are the standard bearers of the business side of comics. And my guest this week is definitely one of those. In a time when comics journalism seems to have all but imploded, David Harper is he's a light at the end of the tunnel. He is there talking to creators. He is there thinking deeply about the industry of comics and doing large pieces. His site Sketched and his podcast Off Panel have become must-reads and must-listens for any of us who think deeply about comics and the comics industry. So it is with great honor that I get to interview the interviewer, Mr. David Harper. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's always funny. I always find that whenever I'm a guest on somebody's podcast, I immediately start trying to interview them, which is absolutely not the right thing to do. But it's just the way my brain works. I'm like, I'm on screen with a microphone in front of me. I know what I'm supposed to do here, and it's not this. Anyways, thank you for having me.
You interviewed me for Sketched not too long ago, and I will say I felt the same way. Like, I know what we're doing here, and so I kept like asking you questions and trying to like pull stuff out of you. Rightfully so, you would not, because you're so seasoned, you wouldn't fall for that trap. But
that's right.
You know,
that's right. I actually, I do want to say, I know this is a complete aside to start. I actually think that's fine. I think that like we as humans ask each other questions. I think it's healthy and conversational to ask questions. And if I ask you questions, if you ask me questions, it's all good. It's all good.
100%. And it's funny you talk about that, because as somebody who, nobody does a podcast like this unless you spend time listening to podcasts like this. You don't go, oh, I just want to talk to someone for 3 hours with a microphone on, unless you've actually heard someone do it well. And I think that the kind of parasocial relationship I have with those people, you've listened to them for hours and hours and hours. And so when someone pulls something out about them, about the interviewer, that's always interesting to, as an audience member. So, yeah. So I can't wait to hear what questions you have for me, I guess is where we're going here.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Can't get there too early. I got more coffee to drink.
All right, let's start off with something. I've got some bad news for you. You've been fired from your day job, which I know that you've been there for a while, because of a new edict from the Alaskan government. And no, I don't know why this is a state issue. You have to do something you are passionate about that is not marketing. What do you do with the rest of your life, David? What is the piece of your I guess I'm going to assume it's comics because that's where I'm leading you, but who knows? Maybe you want to do something else. What is it that you would be doing right now that you're not doing?
I mean, the thing that I've always wanted to do, and the funny thing, I think the thing that distinguishes me from a lot of my peers in the comics journalism and comics podcasting space, most people, the stereotypical idea is that they want to make comics. I have absolutely no interest in that. I've never had interest in that. I actually would want to open my own comic book shop. That's what I've always wanted to do. Of course, I live in Anchorage, Alaska, a city with about 275,000 people with a population that's dropping. And while its main comic shop is very profitable, I don't think that it could sustain multiple of them. So that'd be a terrible idea. But you know what? I love terrible ideas. I'm opening a comic book shop, and I'm going to crush Boscos. In your face, Boscos.
You're gonna crush them. You're gonna take them down. What
That's right.
distinguishes the David Harper comic shop from, say, Bosco's or other places?
I'm gonna make it about readers. I mean, to be honest, I think the thing that Bosco's is very good at a lot of things, but I think one of the things that they don't do, and God, I apologize to anyone that works at Bosco's that happens to listen to this podcast, is they don't really curate their experience very well. And while I know I've heard from people in the industry that having a kind of graphic novel centric comic shop is a bad idea. I think it was a worse idea when I originally was proposing that to them. I think these days having kind of something that is a flip side answer to the existing model that Bosco's has, which is the everything store, but also isn't really
Right.
big on hand selling anyone on anything, isn't really big on curating the inventory. I would have the idea that my wife and I have always talked about. Part of this is joking, is a comics cafe that also has cats. So it'd be a little bit of everything, man. It'd be a cat cafe. We would have
Cat cafe?
scones. My wife's idea was the
Mm.
infinite scones. We would also make breakfast tacos
Mm.
because that is a big part of her as a person from San Antonio. So it'd be a cool place to come over and check out. We'd have events. We'd have art events. We'd have all kinds of stuff. Maybe I would do interviews with creators that I would have host there to make it a little bit spicier. I don't know, man. I haven't really fully thought this out because it turns out that I do have a day job and I also have a lot of other jobs. So I haven't really built out my robust plan yet. But counter programming, I think, would be the solution.
I think what you've just outlined is more of a business plan than many people I know who go into this business. So, I think it feels like to me like you're ready to go, buddy. You you need a location.
I already got 2 cats. I'm part of the way there.
Do you have a home cat and a work cat, or the both cats go to work now? Is that or they come back and forth with you?
I work at home, so they're both work and home cats permanently. They'd be very stressed out about living in a comic shop, though.
Oh, you know what this is? Opportunity for more cats, then, really, is what you're talking about.
That's right. Well, I do, I'll complete aside, but I have volunteered for a local cat rescue for the last 3 years. So, and also I have had foster cats. So maybe that would be a good place to put the foster cats.
Have you cloned yourself? Is that what's going on? Is this like a multiplicity thing where there are multiple David Harpers?
There's one that just really loves pizza. I'm like the only person who actually just made a legit multiplicity reference. I like pizza.
I like pizza, Steve. I like pizza. I remember that. I got a wallet. I remember that show. Yeah, absolutely.
That is literally the only part of that movie I remember besides just a whole lot of Michael Keaton.
There's a whole lot of Michael Keaton.
Yes, I have cloned myself. I honestly, I always tell myself and I tell others that I'm just very efficient at what I do. My wife would probably agree with that. Most people would probably think that that is not possible, but that is really the basis of what I do. I'm just really efficient at stuff.
All right, I'd like to dig in a little bit more on that, but let's go back to the beginning, if you don't mind, because you have been a face in comics for many years now, and like I said, you are one of the few real, as I think of, standard bearers of what comics journalism used to be. Where does this story start? Because the closest I can get is you become a kind of a freelance writer / marketer at a cell phone network. But where does the David Harper story begin?
I mean, it depends on which part of the story you're talking about. When did I start reading comics? When did I start wanting to write about comics? Which part are you referring to?
Well, I mean, we all have that moment, right? We all have that, for me, it was a Donald Duck book. Everybody has that, like that big first comic moment, and it's really special to them. But like, where does this, like something that you're going to take seriously, where does that start? Actually, because you have 2 paths. So let's deal with both of them. One path is you're a comics fan, so much so that you report on it and talk about it. And you're a marketer. You've built a career around marketing. And unlike people like me, you didn't like meld those two. You've kind of kept them in separate camps, seemingly. Where do both of those paths start? Are they starting? Do they have a junction?
Interestingly, maybe not that interesting. We'll find out. I went to school for business. I went to University of Idaho that had a integrated business curriculum that basically required you to learn all facets of business. Like I had 2 degrees, marketing and business management. And so like those 2 degrees were really easy to get because I took every class possible for business as required by the program. But during that
Right.
time, I'd stopped reading comics completely, and I got back into comics this is going back further than you're asking, but I think it's semi-necessary.
Yeah,
I got back
please.
into comics because when I was in college and I went home for the summer, I was talking to my mom and she told me the one thing that I'd ever like she'd ever felt shame about me involving like something that I had done was that I stopped reading comics and because she knew I loved them. I'd stopped reading them. I'd read them throughout my entire life. I stopped reading in high school, and her perception was accurately that I stopped reading because I was worried about social pressures and what people would think of me if I was reading comics. And so
Oh,
I'd I'd stopped reading comics, and she was like, I know you love comics. I know you would love to read comics. What if we went to Bosco's? I will buy you a comic and maybe you can find out you love them again. And that was when I was there for summer. I went, talked to the person at Bosco's who asked me a bunch of questions about what I loved. The last comic I read and loved was Preacher. He recommended Why the Last Man and The Walking Dead and Fables, the first volumes of each, all of which had come out not that long ago. And I was hooked.
okay.
Anyways,
That
so I
definitely
go back.
places it time-wise. Yeah.
Yeah. So I go back to college, get my degree, reading comics all along. The secret also is that I always wanted to be a writer growing up. I wanted to actually write novels, but I was like, yeah, I don't really need to get a degree in, English or something like that. I did get a minor in English, but I ended up getting out of college and just getting into basically the entire country was in a recession at that point because the housing crisis and everything. And so I go back to Alaska, even though I didn't want to go there. And while I was there, I get this job at a telecommunications company, GCI. I was very good at what I did. I don't want to get into that. I mean, I can get into that, but basically I did everything they asked me about as fast as humanly possible and as good as humanly possible. And turns out that companies really like that. But it was
Shocking.
very easy to me. And so I ended up having a lot of free time. And that was when I started writing a personal blog. And while I was writing that personal blog, I would occasionally write about comics. And I could tell that my family and friends who followed that did not appreciate that whatsoever. And not that like they supported me, but they're like, I don't really care about like, I don't know, Ed Brubaker's Captain America run or whatever. And so I'd been on this forum for years, this pop punk forum, Absolute Punk, which I had followed forever because I loved pop punk in college and I loved getting news about albums and concerts and stuff. And there was on the forum there was a thread called Wednesday is New Comic Book Day, and one day one of those people came on and said, I'm starting a comic book site, does anybody want to write for it? And that site was called Multiversity Comics, and I was one of the first 3 people on it. And the funny thing is like I started writing for them. We had absolutely no idea what we were doing, and within I think 4-5 years we were nominated for an Eisner Award, which is pretty funny because we had like just this scrappy we have no idea what we're doing type vibes to us, but eventually we kind of figured out apparently enough. And that was kind of it. Is like I was doing my day job in marketing. I mean, I know that he's very out of season these days. A lot of people hate him. I don't really have. I mean, he just seems kind of strange. But it's kind of a similar story. It's a very low level version of what Nate Silver's story is. Nate Silver had a marketing job that he hated, and during his free time at the job, because he was good enough at his job that he had a ton of free time, he developed a baseball statistic called PECOTA. And that was kind of the beginning of his statistical analysis days. And that's what led him to where he is now, which is a person who posts on Twitter way too much and is very annoying. But anyways, so, but that is kind of what I did is like, I had a job, I was good at it, but I was good enough at it that I had free time. Naturally, nature abhors a vacuum. So I found a way to fill that. I filled it with my love of comics and my love of writing simultaneously. And I went down the path with Multiversity, and that's the direction I went. I don't know where you want to go from there.
No, I love that, and I do want to dig because later on in the interview, when I talk about comics journalism specifically and how it has shifted. But so I want to come back to Multiversity. But at some
Sure.
point that ends for you, and you gain enough experience that you feel confident in launching the first version of Sketched, right?
Yep.
But that only really lasts about a year.
Yep.
Before we dig into that experience, I want to talk about how, like, what is it? I mean, is it just the fact that you have so much free time and your inability to sit still that says I'm going to bet on myself instead of like I'm going to go and, build this career as a writer for other people? Like, where's that come from? Is that what
Are
led
you referring to Sketched?
that? Yeah, what led to that confidence to begin betting on you?
It was less about betting on me, to be honest. I once was at that job I talked about before. I was at my first review. I was asked, where do you want to be in 5 years? And my answer was, I don't know. I don't really have a 5-year plan. And then I changed my answer and I told the person I wanted their job, which they thought was hilarious. I had a good reason for it, but regardless, it was a very unusual thing to say to a person who is a vice president at a company when it's your first review. So I don't really
I actually said that to a boss once, and it was a huge turning point for me. I'm like, he said, well, how do I get your job? And he's like, what? But it was a big turning point for me. It was like,
was
well,
it a good
here's what
turning
you're not
point?
doing.
Was it a good turning point?
Inside of that job? Yeah, it was. Inside of that job, he said, you're right now, you really look out for yourself and you really should become what is known as a company man. And I had never even thought of that. And that like totally shifted, which led to me moving to California from Texas, which led to me working in a comic shop, which led to me buying that comic shop. So in that way, yeah, I guess it did turn out.
Yeah. Adam, I'm like the worst company man that's ever existed. I am like, they say no man is an island, but I am like somehow just an island in every archipelago I go to. That's just how I roll. But I think that does kind of relate to why I decided to start Sketched. It wasn't really about betting on myself. It was more about writing what I want to write. I know you were talking about going back to Multiversity in a bit, but I do want to say, like, in 4.5 or 5 years, however long I was there, I wrote like 3,200 articles.
Jesus.
Yeah, and like a lot of it was like a bunch of stuff it wasn't that I wasn't interested in writing it. I wouldn't have wrote it if I wasn't interested, but a lot of it was that churn and burn stuff of get a press release, interpret it, post it. I'm going to write a review of the latest episode of The Walking Dead where I watched the show, and by far the longest part of the experience is actually watching the show. Doing very quick reviews every week. I mean, that's another thing. I said I was efficient. Like, a lot of people, I would write like, let's say 700 to 1,000 word article or reviews for a comic. Most people would take a while. I would take like 15 minutes. It was really fast for me. And it just comes out of me. I don't know why. But the thing about it is I was burned out. I was tired of doing that stuff. And the things that I enjoyed the most were my kind of feature articles where I'd write about the industry or the art form. Big interviews that I really like doing where I talk to creators about specific things in the world. It was less about the promotional hullabaloo, the circus and everything like that. And it was more about what do I want to do in this? What do I want to do in this world and where do I fit? And if you just look at Sketch 1.0, I didn't even have ads. Clearly, I had no plan to make money off of it. So I just wanted to put together an environment that allowed me to do the things that I wanted to do. And so I just shifted the focus to long form articles, to interviews, to basically, I've always told people I don't do previews at all. I've been offered so many quote unquote exclusive previews and I say no. I very rarely do reviews. I just wanted to do the things that I wanted to do. I just wanted to be to quote the cast of Seinfeld about a thing that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I wanted to be the master of my own domain. And please God, I hope people do not interpret that in the way that they meant it in Seinfeld.
Listen,
it's just using the same line.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I just wanted to kind of, have control. I just wanted to do my thing. And it's not that Multiversity didn't let me do that. It's just that it came with other things that I didn't really want to do. And so I just wanted to focus on my own space because this was a passion project. And it's like, who wants to do the things that they don't want to do with their passion project? I didn't.
Right.
And so I built my own thing.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
and it was sorry, really quick. And I will say, like,
please.
When it comes to building Sketched and kind of everything I've done, the number one influence has nothing to do with comics. I would say the number one influence was the no longer existing site Grantland, which was a site created by Bill Simmons as a sister site to ESPN that had just absolutely incredible writers. And it was about sports. It was about pop culture. I would say NBA writing is probably my biggest influence. When I developed Sketch 2.0, the two biggest influences were Cleaning the Glass, which is a deep dive basketball site, and The Athletic, which is now owned by the New York Times. And it's just, I don't really look to comics for my influences, and Sketched, I think, is perhaps reflective of that.
It's interesting that you made the choice to, and I mean, as someone who does this a lot, where you take outside influences and bring it to comics, as opposed to, using those skills, like in that, whatever that thing it is that you were inspired by, right? You haven't chosen to become, the next great sports writer, but that's still something that you're very passionate about. You're choosing to bring the things that you learn from sports writing over to comics. Is that? I mean, honestly, I would imagine that the market potential for sports writing has to be much greater than the amount, the calories that you burn in bringing that to comics. Is there a reason why you're kind of distilling it as opposed to competing in that arena?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons for it. One is, bizarrely, I've never actually been interested. I don't want to say never. I've never had the thought of, like, I want to write about sports. I occasionally I'm like, it'd be fun to write an article about it, but I never really am like, I should start a site to write about basketball. Here's a funny thing. So I have an editor and for the podcast, Deanna Chapman, who's amazing. And she always does a first pass. I do a second pass. But quite often, I will talk about sports in my podcast. And she will every time say, why do you not start an NBA podcast? And I'm like, I don't know. The big thing for me is it is this has nothing to do with why I made the decision, but it's why I continue to not go down that path, at least in part. Sports, The world of sports is inundated with people who want to write about sports and podcast about sports and do all that stuff. It is a hyper competitive market at a time where there's very little left for the little guy. And especially now, like, even if I wanted to start an NBA podcast, I could be the greatest NBA podcast in the world, and it would be really hard to make an impact. It'd be really hard to break into that space. And when I started with comics, again, this isn't why I did it. It was a lot easier to break into writing about comics than it was to break into writing about sports. The ceiling is higher, but the floor is, I don't know, comparable. But at the same time, like, with somebody with like my approach, I think that the floor was higher, so to speak. I was not that strategic about it, but it's a lot of it has to do with competition and just kind of how the overall market works.
That makes sense. It's always been it's been my life story of always choosing to be the big fish in a small pond, right? As opposed to like trying to find a way into that larger pond. But I can personally, I see that. Well, so at some point you decide,
I just was going to say, it was more about just following what I was passionate about in the moment. Like I fell into Multiversity, but then I really love doing it, and I really love finding new answers. I really love doing what I do on Sketch and stuff. And so it became like kind of a self-perpetuating machine at some point. And it just became something that I just kind of like, I think about a lot. And so, also, I live in Alaska. It's not exactly a hotbed of sports stuff, but with comics, everyone lives everywhere. So it's not like we have like the Seattle Marvel creators and we kind of have the Portland Image creators, but still, there isn't like kind of regional distinctions to it, while there is in sports. And so Alaska, cursed.
I mean, I don't know. I would say that you say that, and I think it might be the first time I've ever considered it, but there is a definite, it's kind of a tonal difference between writers, especially, and artists even, I think, in where they live. Like, I can think of people I think of as New York, like living in Brooklyn, like the people I think of as New York cartoonists or New York comic book creators. They have a tone that isn't available in those that live in Portland.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
interesting. Yeah, I hadn't
Sorry, what
actually
were
thought
you
about
going
that.
to do?
No, I have no idea where I was going. Oh yeah, so you launched Sketched, but only lasts about a year. Is it just
Right.
because you, the king of filling every moment, just get burned out on it? Where does that come from? That you put it to
Uh,
bed?
so it was primarily burnout. I was
Yeah.
writing. I mean, I was writing a lot. The funny thing is, I'm writing about as much as I was then now, but I was writing enough where I had a really hard time continuing to fill that well and trying to go back and be able to keep going. And the funny thing is when I closed the site because I was burned out, and I kind of, and I also kind of felt it shifting my relationship with comics. Like my dad, I was going to work. I wanted to work for the Seattle Mariners when I was a kid. I love the Seattle Mariners. I still love the Seattle Mariners. And I'm shockingly, I am a very big fan of sports. I don't want to just write about them, but my dad had somehow secured a job for the summer for me to work for the Seattle Mariners. I just had to go and live in Seattle by myself when I was 16, and I was a big coward, and I didn't. And the I regret it still, but what are you gonna do? And so I was going to work for them, but my dad, when he told me about the job, he was just like, be careful about making your hobby your job because it can change your relationship with it. And I've always remembered that because he's right. And in the first year of Sketched, it really did. Like, it turned in a way that Multiversity kind of never did, because I think the camaraderie of the site, because there was a lot of people on there, and it just kind of made it a little bit more fun. Sketched it turned comics into a job in a very real way. And that's not to say comics are not currently a job, but it was a way that I
Right.
just couldn't deal with in that moment. And so that, combined with just the burnout of like, how do I keep coming up with ideas? I had to stop. The funny thing is, Heidi McDonald at The Beat wrote an article. I've told this story a lot of times, and every time I think it's really funny to me. And I'm always curious if Heidi actually hears it. But Heidi wrote this article about basically like, you get what you pay for, and like talked about how Sketch was closed, and like it didn't have financial support, and like that's probably part of the reason why it closed. In that moment, that had nothing to do with why I closed. It was all burnout, but she was right in the end, because I did not monetize it whatsoever, and not having any money coming in for all the hours and hours and hours I put in really did affect me. And then I wrote that article I talked about before we started recording. There was a article I wrote about the 25th anniversary of Image Comics and the history of that. I wrote for The Ringer, which is the site that followed Grantland in Bill Simmons's empire. So I did kind of write for Grantland, the site that I always wanted to write for. And they paid me. And you know what was awesome? Getting paid. I loved it. It was so fantastic. And so I was like, man, I really like writing when I get paid. And also during that time, before I wrote that article for The Ringer, I stopped Sketch, but I kept Off Panel going. And when I brought Off Panel back, I launched a Patreon, and I really like getting paid for Off Panel too. And so I started to realize that maybe Heidi was right, and I didn't realize it. And so I think that it was really a combination of burnout and making comics my job in a way that was not satisfactory, and also making comics my job and not getting paid for that job, it turns out, was a really
non-paying
big deal.
job.
Yeah. I mean, so many people who write about comics and podcasts about comics are doing it purely because they love it, and that is fantastic.
Yeah.
And I did it for a long time, but it really does make a difference. And not to, get on a, step stool and start yelling at people, but if you love people's work, support it, because it makes a massive difference in their lives.
100%.
Whether or not that's comics, whether that's comic podcasting, journalism, or whatever, support the work. and you make a huge difference in people's lives.
100%. And I will tell you, this is something that Fred Pierce, who I used to work with at Valiant, and was well, I think, I don't remember what his title was at Wizard, but he talked about, especially as a publisher, the how important it was for us to support the press, right? Support, sponsor when we could, to buy advertising, because we wanted it to be there. And that, I'm kind of revealing what I want to talk about later in the episode, but this is actually something I have struggled with. So maybe, if you don't mind, let's make this all about me. We're coming up on a year of doing this podcast. I've done something like 50 of them. Nothing like I got this number. I don't know if this is true. 476 episodes of Off Panel you've done so far. Mm-hmm. But we have never charged for it. We don't have a Patreon. We haven't done any we haven't taken in any ads. We've talked a lot about taking in ads, but we're getting to a place where I think I'm starting to feel what you're talking about. This is a big job that we do. And I do pay people to work on it. So it doesn't come without expense. But I guess my question is how has that, because you launched Sketch 2.0. Actually, you launched Off Panel when you launched Sketch 1.0, and then you kind of launched Sketch 2.0. And obviously you've worked on these sort of things. Do you feel like have any of those choices informed or changed the choices you've made as to the subject you talk about or the people that you interview? Have you been able to keep that, I want to keep doing the things that I'm interested in, or this becomes work? I think my biggest fear, and part of the reason we haven't monetized this at all, is that the choices of monetization are going to inform how we choose what we talk about, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess obviously I'm struggling with this. So if you don't mind, let's make this all about me. But yeah,
I am a terrible. Yeah. I mean, I say this with respect. I'm an absolutely terrible person to ask this question because I can swear on this, right?
Please do.
I don't give a shit what everybody thinks. At all. I say that with love. Okay. I love a lot of people in comics, but I knowing you isn't the royal you, all of the yous,
sure,
and people giving me money and all this stuff like that does not influence my work in the slightest. I do not think about I don't think about that whatsoever. I don't think about who subscribes to the site. I have a lot of people in the industry who subscribe to my site. And if I have to write something bad about them, I'm going to write something bad about them. And I don't mean it. I'm not going to make it personal. I'm not going to make it negative. I will never, my goal is to not be negative. I ultimately want to be, I want to write about the things I love about, and I want to talk about the things I love about. But I know a lot of people talk about if you write the wrong thing, you're going to get blacklisted. And if you want to blacklist me, and I know I've been told by somebody from a prominent publisher, I'll put it like that they were told to not come on my podcast because the publisher said to not do that, and they did anyways. I don't care. If you want to do that, that's fine. I'm not really worried about what people do. So when it comes to monetization, on the flip side, if you want to support me, thank you so much. I appreciate it so much. But you supporting me is not going to make a difference in what I cover, because I think the only way that Sketch and Off Panel are as good as they are, and depending on who you ask, maybe they're good, maybe they're not, I don't know, is me doing my thing and following the things that interest me. That's the only way that the everything turns out as good or not good as they happen to be. And so I follow what is inspiring to me. But yeah, so I think that honestly, it's I mean, if you're putting money into it, you got to find a way to monetize it, just because at the very least, it's even if you can't afford it, finding a way to kind of turning it into a self-sustaining thing, I think really makes a difference. And that's what I discovered when I did Off Panel's Patreon, is it helped a lot, because even though I wasn't putting a ton of actual money into it at first, and I am now, I put a lot of time into it, and I'm sure you put a lot of time into it. I mean, your interviews, I mean, we're We've been talking for a while. Like, the time is money, baby. You got to keep it going.
I know. Yeah, and I bill by the hour. Absolutely. No, I
Are you
definitely
billing
agree
me?
with that.
Is that how you make your money? You're billing me?
Don't listen. Listen, when the invoice comes in, it'll be reasonable. I'm not
Well,
looking to, you know.
we'll talk about this later. We'll talk about this later off the air. But I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like, it's just,
I do.
I think to some degree, I remember this is another Heidi thing, and she told me this privately. So sorry, Heidi, but she told me shortly after I started Sketch 1.0, she told me, she was like, you need to develop thicker skin. And she was also right that time, because I did need to develop thicker skin. And I still, I'm a softie. I'm not going to lie. Despite the fact that I'm like, I don't give a shit. I am a
Yeah.
huge baby person. And I have a hard time sometimes when, like, bad things happen, but I've gotten a lot better. And a lot of it was because I had people like Heidi, who is just like, you got to get better at this part of the job, David. And she was right.
Yeah. I can hear her giving that advice. Well, I wonder how much of that, and maybe none, but I wonder how much of it, because I feel like you're editorially, in quotes, I can see how the motivator of I'm going to be the best at developing something that David Harper would be interested in, as opposed to be, mediocre at chasing whatever the money incentive is. I wonder how much of that is the fact that you've maintained a day job. I mean, you've been at Brilliant Media Strategies now for 12 years, right? Is that right?
That
Something
is
like
correct.
that? Yeah. And like during that time, really, you've been building this little media empire of your own. How do you think that, I mean, does one influence the other, or like, how does that in your day job really, does it inform how you see the comics industry?
Not that I can actually point to, but I will say that you're right. I mean, it fundamentally underwrites what I do. Um, it allows me the freedom to not have to worry about what other people, like, it's a lot easier for me to say I don't care what people think, when I have, like, if Sketch and Off Panel fell apart tomorrow, I would just keep doing my day job and I would be fine. I would have a lot
Yeah.
more free time. I would probably do something else, because I hopefully I would not just play Marvel Rivals or something like that. It might happen. But
Sure.
it does allow me the freedom to say no. And, like, that is a very powerful thing in any job. But I think quite
Uh-huh.
often, maybe even more so in comics. And so I do think it influences in that way. Um, I haven't really thought about it if it affects me creatively. I will say my jobs over the years have kind of, to some degree, affected me, because my job is an advertising agency. It does make me think about visuals in a way that I wouldn't normally. It also makes me think about, um, like, how I want to behave on, like, social media and things like that. But the truth is this is funny. This is a terrible thing. I know how to make social media work in my favor. I have absolutely no interest in doing that, though. Like, my day job, I'm the vice president of digital
Interesting.
at Brilliant. I know, like, what it takes to, like, I know what it takes to succeed on social media, and I know what it takes to, like, go big or whatever, like, get a lot of
Yeah.
engagement. But it's just, it requires behavior that is fundamentally not congruent with me as a person. So it's like, it only influences me so far, because I'm just not that type of guy. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with I mean, if you're an influencer, more power to you. People have told me and
Yeah.
I'm an influencer, and I find it hilarious. But I don't know. It is interesting, where it's like the one place you would think they would influence me the most for my comic stuff, it just doesn't, and it's mostly because of perhaps my own failings as a person.
Is it failings? I don't know. I mean, well, actually, it does feel like a failing to me, because I have consulted on social media campaigns that were wildly successful, and I know where, like, our company falls down. I know where those weaknesses are. I just
Yeah,
can't, like, put my attention on it because I'm so busy with other stuff.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
interesting. It's a real struggle to kind of find that balance. So primarily that is your gig is working social media for your clients, advertising, or what does your day-to-day look like?
Well, I can't get too far into it, but what I will say is
Okay,
basically it's less about organic content. It's more about paid advertising. And so it's like
gotcha.
managing advertising campaigns for a wide variety of clients that are largely oriented on generating results that are trackable and provable. Let's put it like that. So it's you know, direct response advertising through online media, amongst other things. I also directed a
Gotcha.
video or a TV commercial or 2 TV commercials recently. So, and wrote them.
Oh,
I
wow.
do a lot of
Wow.
things. I do a lot of things. So, I even directed and wrote and starred in a commercial for a another company here at one point this year, or at one point in my career. So, you never know what you're gonna do.
Wow.
Yeah, you will never find that video. You will never find it.
Oh, I don't know. It's got to be out there somewhere. If you're listening to this and you know where it is, please send it. We would definitely like to see that.
uh,
Who? Well, all right. Then I don't want to push too hard on something. I don't want to put you in trouble in your day job. But so, who do you think? Yeah, but as someone who has professional stake in this and who watches the people that I probably watch as well, who do you think are the best marketers in comics now? Who are the best? As far as advertising and marketing goes, who do you think is winning that group?
oh my god, I kind of want to beep this.
Oh,
Um,
really? Okay.
no, I don't know. I mean, it's tough. It like okay, to have this conversation, you have to have a conversation about what comics marketing does and does not have, right? Because I think that it needs to be set off the top that there are two things that comics marketing is woefully lacking in: enough time to
Please.
handle the amount of comics that they have to work with, and enough money to handle all the comics that they have to work with. And it's like it's hard for anyone to succeed in an environment where, let's say you're a marketer at Marvel and you have to promote like 80 comics a month, and you also have to promote the combined 460 variant covers that go with those, and you have to try to market them to retailers, but you also have to try to hopefully tell comic readers that they're going to be in shops X, Y, or Z, and also they're on FOC now, and all these different things. How do you do that while there's like 3 people on staff and there's just not enough money to do that? It's really tough. It's really tough. As far as people that I think are really good, I think Jaslyn Stone's awesome. I think Jaslyn Stone is from Tiny Onion, I believe director of
Right.
communications from Tiny Onion. I think she's very good at what she does. I think she knows how to work with people, but also never loses who she is. And I think that that is a very, very tough thing to do. She also has kind of a different job than most marketers. I think the superfan folks do a really good job. I think David Hyde and Hannah Behedry and Pamela Mullen. It's Pamela Mullen Horvath, right?
I don't know, Pam. So I
Okay.
don't know.
Anyways, all right. So the superfan folks over there, I think that they do a really good job. I also appreciate that they like allow for individuality. Like David knows that I'm like I don't do promotional interviews. That's not really my thing. And
Yeah.
so he is kind of smart about recognizing people's weaknesses and strengths. And I think he does a really great job. And I think people are smart to work with the superfan folks. Somebody who I actually think is awesome, and I think a big thing that really, really works in his favor, Greg Katzman from IDW. He is so good at working with the
Yeah.
press, and at least in part because he used to work for the in the press as well.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
and he does an amazing job at engaging with the press and making sure that they don't just feel like he's telling them what to do, but they can come to him with pitches and like putting them in a position to feel like they're empowered. And like, I know that that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's a massive deal because I think a lot of times the reason why comic sites get stuck in the kind of churn of previews, reviews, and news is because they don't feel like the door is open for them to do more than that. And Greg opens that door all the time, and I think that that is great. Last person I'm going to say, just because I don't want to just keep ranting names, Clark Bull from DC. I think Clark is fantastic at his job. I don't even know what Clark's job is these days. Clark's just this person I email if I'm like, I want to do something wild at DC. And the funny thing is like, I never feel like I feel like Clark always appreciates it when I try to do something crazy, even if
Yeah.
ultimately Clark cannot deliver on that. And like that allowing for big pitches. Like so my most recent episode 477 of Off Panel that just went up on Monday was with Scott Snyder, Kelly Thompson, and Jason Aaron, the three writers of the Absolute books over at DC. And
Yeah.
I went to Clark and I was like, basically I was just like, I don't want to talk to one of them, I want to talk to all of them. And like I think for most people like that would probably be a no. And like I think Clark knew that
Yeah.
I would do something interesting with it. And Clark's vision to not just see opportunities for others but to recognize opportunities as potentially impactful when they come his way, I think is a really big gift. Now a lot of that is more PR stuff that I've been talking about. It's less like external marketing. But to be
Yeah.
honest, like I think that a lot of, comics marketing, so to speak, the main space that they have to operate in because the lack of money is PR. And I think that is just a huge part of the job. And I think PR is important, but I also think that there's a reason why a lot of the biggest things in the last like 15 years of comics have had a lot of a lot of marketing put behind them.
Very true. That is very true. So what do you think what's the lowest hanging fruit? Like if it's not, I mean, PR obviously is the thing that you can leverage, easily without a big budget. What otherwise though, where were you, like if a comics publisher is coming into, BMS, brilliant me, I don't know how you guys acronym that, what would you counsel them as, like, here's the thing that everybody else is missing or that the best people are not missing?
It's really tough. I mean, so as you know, and as listeners probably know, there's complicating factors to the way that comics marketing works because there's complicating factors to the way comics work. Um, the way that you promote a book, graphic novel, is going to be completely different than the way that you would promote a single issue series because like they operate on complete different timelines. You're targeting different people.
Mhm.
I mean, like, I honestly think one of the biggest complicating factors that people don't talk about externally when they're roasting comics marketing is the fact that, like, how do you create a direct response where you're trying to actually generate action in customers when they can't buy it until 3 months after it's announced? Like, that is such a complicating thing, and something I'm sure you've run into many times in your job.
Oh yeah. Oh
Particularly
yeah.
Valiant. Um, but I mean, it's part of the reason why I think marketing is particularly impactful when it comes to Kickstarters. Is like you actually have a way to drive people to a specific action. Um, but I mean, as far as low hanging fruit, there's not a lot of digital marketing that happens out there. In terms of comic publishers, at least as far as I know. But the thing is like everyone knows what comic shops are out there. You can get a list of every comic shop, and like I'm sure that most publishers have to some degree a list of every single comic shop in the entire country / world. You can just geofence those locations and serve ads to every single person who goes into those, and you can do it really efficiently with banner ads. And like you can drive them to a site that has all of your, I mean, let's say you're like Mad Cave and you have like your like direct to consumer stuff on there, but you also have the digital stuff people can buy on there. Every person that goes in there is probably interested in comics to some degree. You can run banner ads about like, buy our latest comics, yada yada yada. Drive them to a landing page that is just direct to consumer and just digital comics. Buy it right now. You can track the results. I never like it's so efficient from a cost standpoint to do something like that, and the foot traffic is not so mammoth that it would be prohibitive. I've never really understood why people don't really do that beyond the fact that time, cost, and the way that the direct market works with the extended timeline. It's hard to activate people, especially when if you're Mad Cave, it's like targeting comic shops. Let's say you wanted to say buy our comics. I think the biggest problem you would have if you're Mad Cave is, does the comic shop even carry Mad Cave comics? So
Right.
like the battle
100%.
is
Yeah.
lost when FOC hits, which is again part of the reason why comics marketing is so complicated. Um, anyways, this might have either been very interesting or very boring, but I don't know.
I don't, well, listen, this, as you were saying earlier, this podcast is really about my interests. So yes,
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. And it is something that actually I'm working on for a couple of different clients. Is something similar to what you're talking about. That's part of why I love that answer. Something though you said at the top about your interest in running a comic shop, and as somebody who has run a comic shop, I can tell you, I've stayed so close to the direct market as a result. If you're, let's say you finally get, a Harper's Comics and Cats and Scones, like how, knowing what you know about marketing, about digital marketing, and knowing what you know about the comics industry, what do you think is the low hanging fruit for that shop? Like, what are the things you're going to be doing to bring attention to you or generate sales? Like, is there anything there that you, on a very micro neighborhood sort of level, that you would be doing?
I mean, with the massive caveat that I have not built out my business plan and my marketing plan for my it's Stiltman's Comics, Cats and Café.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Pardon me.
sorry. Actually, no, I have debated what I would call it, and there was part of me I was like, should I just call it sketch? I'm like, that's kind of meaningless to most people. I mean, I think part of it, this isn't a marketing thing, but I think part of it is I talked about counter programming earlier, and like Bosco's is what it is, and as much as like I love it, and as much as it does have a neighborhood vibe, I mean, it's literally a 2-minute drive for me. I just drive right up a hill, then take a right and take another right, and I'm there. As much as it has that vibe, it has never had that neighborhood, like cool place to stop by energy to it. It's always to some degree, it's like a place you go when you want to buy something, so to speak. And so I would want to,
Utilitarian.
what's that? Yeah, utilitarian. Absolutely. Right. It's commerce focused, it's utilitarian. You stop by, you want your sports cards, you want your Magic cards, you want your Warhammer stuff. This is where you go. That's great. What I would want to do is I would want to cultivate a place, like I want to make it a hangout spot. I want to make it the type of thing that people want to go and they want to spend the day at. And like people joke about, like, I've talked to a lot of comic creators who were really influenced by the bookstores they went to as a kid. Like they would go to Borders or they would go to Barnes and Noble and they would just grab a book off the stands and then they would just read it as they drink their coffee for an entire day. And like they would just be, basically loiterers. And I'm not saying I just want a horde of loiterers coming in, but at the same time, I do think that making yourself the type of place that people want to be rather than the type of place that people go when they want something is two dramatically different things. And so it's not really a marketing thing. It's more about positioning myself in the market. And I think that would be like the main thing that I try to cultivate. I've always wanted, I've been like, as much as people want to be in like pure commercial spaces, I would love to be in kind of a more hybrid commercial residential space where I can be part of a community. Like that's one thing. Have you ever been to Books with Pictures in Portland?
I have. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Katie Pride's store.
Yeah. I think Katie has done Katie literally lives above her own shop. And so like the fact that you're a part of something and you develop this community because you are part of something. I think that would be one of the things that I would cultivate. I don't know what buttons I would push to get there. That is kind of a touchy-feely thing from a marketing standpoint. But that is one of the things that I'd really want to do. Maybe not the most useful answer to your question, but that's kind of where the vibe that I want to cultivate that hopefully I could then develop into a marketing plan.
I mean, is it where I was trying to go? No, but I think it is an interesting take on retail. I love Shannon and Matt Live, who I interviewed a little while ago. They seem to have developed that feel, but also in creating something even more, say, commercial than what Katie has done. I think that, Katie, it feels like, her store is not so much about maximizing sales as it is maximizing experience. And I loved the experience personally, but I mean, there are more successful shops in her area, right? I think that's, so it is making a decision. And I think that that's an interesting, I don't know, it's an interesting, formula to have to algebra to solve.
I do have a useful answer for you. I just thought of it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Good.
I
think that, like, obviously a lot of shops have online stores, and I think that they make a real difference. But I think that not enough do. I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that a lot of point of sale systems either barely exist or don't exist. Like, for example, my shop, again, say it with love, but their point of sale system is literally built on Windows 98. That is an absolute fact. And so Alaska is a big state. Like, literally, it is massive, geographically speaking. And there's a lot of people who are interested in what, like, comic shops have to offer. And what I would want to do, and I think the useful point of counter programming would be actually creating a real online store that people could shop in the area, and that I would, obviously I'd load up with all of my inventory, but I would try to, like, have specialty inventory that people would want. And I would specifically target the underserved areas of Alaska, because that is pretty much the entirety of the state, and run advertising specifically targeting people who have some level of comic interest around the state to try to drive people to the online store. And obviously you can do conversion tracking to make sure that you are achieving the results you want. You can optimize towards those conversions. And so it would be about developing a advertising campaign that would be really efficient, because our population is unfortunately not large, driving people to my online store for purely conversion based marketing. So perhaps that's slightly better. It's still something I just came up with.
I love that.
I just, it's such a big state, and there's so many people that love things, and trying to encourage that, it just seems like a slam dunk.
Well, Bosco's folks, if you're listening, I'd recommend Brian Garside's Managed Comics, or Django Boren and Jeff Figley's Comic Shop Assistant, even Comic Hub, any of those three. Yeah,
I was going to say, you're trying to cultivate your data, trying to grow your data set. What are we doing here? I'm just kidding. But also serious.
Listen, no, you're not wrong. Listen, there's a reason that I chose the two that are growing, and that's because they're growing because they work, right? So that's those two things are not disconnected. All right. I'd love to kind of pivot a little bit here. So in your episode 400 of your podcast, you had a call-in show, which I loved, where you pre-recorded messages from your Patreon users, and I feel irritated that I didn't get a chance to call in with a question. But in it, you referenced some mind-boggling business decisions that publishers make, and you talked about how creators, in order to kind of insulate that, could should be thinking about working for themselves. Two things I absolutely agree with. I also, though, take point in like we had a conversation with David Baker where I basically said, yes, but publishers, there's a reason they exist, and it's because not every creator is good at everything, right? So I guess my question, when you were referring to those mind-boggling decisions, I mean, it's been a little while since you recorded this episode. Did there any jump out at you that you remember what you were talking about? Because it was kind of a vague throwaway, but I'm curious to hear your take on that.
I think that was Kieran Gillen's question, if I remember correctly. It's weird that I remember the person who asked the question, but I don't remember anything I said in response to said question. I don't remember what I was talking about. That was like a year and a half ago. But I will say that, I mean, take your pick. I just like, I think a lot of it kind of comes down to probably things that Dave was talking about, Dave Baker, is that, like, a lot of the mind-boggling decisions are publishers basically like turning the entire creator community around them because of their like horrible business decisions, their horrible business practices. That might not be what I was talking about then, but I mean, a lot of it is like, look at Scout, look at Aftershock, look at like all these publishers that have just, I mean, like, even like, I like people there. I already noted somebody from there, but it's like, I don't think I would be interested in taking a book to IDW right now because of just all the turmoil there. You can see them radiate energy that just seems like it's a bad idea to kind of post up there. And so it I don't know if there are any specifics, but it's more just like kind of I don't want to say anti-creator behavior, but like behavior that is based on kind of taking advantage of people. And those aren't necessarily the bad decisions that I was referring to then, but I think that's a lot of it, where it's just like, if I was a creator who has a great idea, would I rather take it to somebody who's going to take 50% of the media rights but really control 100% of them? Or would I rather find a way to do it myself and own 100% of it? Now, the question is, will anyone ever see it or read it if it doesn't go through a publisher? Maybe not.
Right.
And maybe that's not, and maybe that's worth it to you to possibly risk that. Or maybe it's not. But there's so many horror stories from creators who had like great ideas or great books that lost the rights to them because they went to the wrong place and the book just didn't work out. I don't want to say any of them because like I don't want to put creators' stories out that they haven't been putting out there necessarily, but it's
Sure.
a far too common tale. And I don't know. I mean, like I know some creators, like there's a cartoonist who I really love, and I've told him a number of times that if I were him, I'm gonna speak broadly to who this person is. They have a lot of comics, a lot of web comics over the years, and they have control of those. And they also have a lot of support from their fans that they've cultivated over the years. I really think somebody like that should go to Kickstarter. I think that just is a slam dunk. You already have an existing fan base. You have the material done. I mean, look at Jeff Smith right now. Jeff Smith is, I mean, cartoon books shifting into a Kickstarter model is smart as hell. There's no reason why,
Yeah.
like, I mean, beyond like coming up with another bone and selling it to Scholastic, which I don't think he's really at a place to do. Getting more out of Bone through like special editions and the Thorn strips that he did in college, all that stuff. He has so many fans. He has literally generations of fans. He has the material. Find a way to leverage it himself. And that's easy to do when you have an existing audience. I don't know what to say to new creators, but anyways, that is a complete aside. Long story short, I don't know what bad decisions I was referring to, but it probably had a lot to do with the fact that there are so many I mean, you could just take your pick. There's so many publishers that have publicly burned themselves with how they've managed creator relations over the last 5 or 10 years.
Oh, you're not wrong about that. And I think you did give a couple of really great examples of that. And I would say that, they've also, those companies that you mentioned also made other decisions. I know from being inside one of them, they were making a lot of decisions that just didn't make sense from a business standpoint, even beyond how they dealt with creators. Although there was some real creator nightmares, and at least one of them.
Are you familiar with the idea of the Tyson zone?
The Tyson zone.
No. It was
No.
something Bill Simmons created a long time ago, and it was about Mike Tyson, and the idea was that the Tyson zone is when somebody reaches a point where you believe literally any story about them because they've just been so weird for so long. And there are some times where there are comic publishers where you could tell me like anything, and I'd just be like, yeah, sure, right, yeah, IDW is doing
That
Bible
sounds
comics. Right. Okay, yeah, sure. I mean,
hey man, I have this pet theory about Bible comics as a kid who grew up as like a Bible nerd.
Are they gonna be really popular?
I think so, and I think that there's like this weird. This is my own little. I'm going to put a tinfoil hat on here for a moment. There's this almost the same number of direct market stores, direct market comic shops, as there are Christian bookstores, and sure, they are almost all independently owned in the same way that comic stores are. Mm-hmm. And any bookstore or library worth has been growing because they've been adding comics in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. Christian bookstores, huge market sitting right there. Somebody take down.
Here's the dichotomy of being me. One, I completely agree with you. I actually think from a business standpoint, it's like I could see that succeeding. And why not? Why not go down that path? The other side of me is I think it's weird, and it fits into my Tyson zone theory because, like, I mean, when you're in your car, you're doing a earnings report, and you're like, we're going to do Bible comics. I'm like, all this, it paints a picture, Adam. It paints a picture, and it's the Tyson zone. Anyways, Sorry, I apologize if I've ruined your relationship with IDW.
Not at all. Not at all. I'm looking forward to seeing the IDW. I don't know, evangelical comics. I'm looking forward to that. Have you ever thought about? I mean, I know you did some writing for Skybound at some point. Have you ever thought about doing work for publishers, like specifically? I mean, you're a marketer, you're a writer. Like, there's a lot. You know, comics. You know, business. Has that ever been a temptation?
I've been approached by multiple comic publishers to work for them,
I have no doubt.
and I have declined every time for a number of reasons. Um, I you know, I've been interested. I've gotten close. But it's just for one reason or another, cowardice perhaps. I've not decided to go down that path. To be honest, it's like I kind of like my position as it stands. And it's like comics can be bewildering. Comics as a whole kind of exists in the Tyson zone where it's
Yeah.
often unpredictable and a lot of this stuff makes no sense. And you look at it and you're just like, why is this a thing? And there's a part of me that prefers to be on the outside looking in rather than on the inside for that reason. Um, Again, that might just be cowardice, but it's I never aspired to work as an editor. I never aspired to work in marketing or something like that. Um, all of the jobs that I was offered have been kind of very much tailored towards me. And they've been interesting, but not interesting enough for me to kind of move in that direction. Also, some of them would have required me to literally move in a different direction outside of Alaska, and my wife hates hot weather. And basically, hot weather is anywhere that is not Alaska, and so that is difficult. Global warming is not my friend when it comes to moving out of this state ever.
No, it's coming for you. That is for sure.
I mean,
All right, so
it is.
yeah.
Oh, wait, can I ask you a
Please.
question really quick? You've had
Yeah,
all
let's go.
these different. You've had all these different roles, and you kind of like you weave in and out of being a publisher, being at a publisher, not being at a publisher, being at a publisher. How do you decide which one feels right? Is it just about the moment? Is it just about the offer, or like, I don't know. How do you decide? You've lived on both sides, and I find that interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I had dinner with some friends not too long ago, and we were talking, and these were two successful people. Like, they both have had quite a bit of financial and creative success. And I was surprised that both of them, when asked, used spite as a motivator. Right? They, like, somebody did them wrong, or somebody told them they couldn't, and they were like just determined to prove that person wrong or get an opportunity to gain something on top of them or something. And they both
Specifically
really
in
were.
comics. Like,
I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk about.
Okay, yeah. Okay, sorry.
But yeah. I don't want to talk about who they were specifically, but because there's no reason to. It's like, these are just successful people, and I realized that for me, spite was never a motivator. I'm just not interested in proving anybody wrong. I don't have like a list of people I'm in the tall grass for. For me, it's about novelty. It's about what's next, right?
Yeah.
It's about, I've never done that before, or that's a really cool idea that nobody's ever tried before, or like, this is something that I'm really curious about and I want to have an opportunity to explore. That really has been the like motivator for me in taking jobs. And it, like, legitimately, if I have two things in front of me, one of them is going to be incredibly lucrative and one of them is going to be something new that nobody's ever tried, the chances are good I'm going to try the new thing. Which, much to my family's chagrin, because we'd probably be much more financially successful if I was able to see that in the moment. But
you got to do the George Clooney thing. You got to do one for them and one for me, where the them is your family, the lucrative part, and then the other one is the curiosity thing. I will say, I mean, that more than anything, my number one driver is curiosity. The reason why I 100%. Do what I do is because I'm interested in the stories behind comics. And that's part of the reason why I don't think I'm interested in promotional interviews, is because, like, just being another person who asks, like, Chip Zdarsky, like, why did Batman punch the Joker this month? I'm like, I don't care. I don't care, man. I'm like, but like talking to Chip about, like, you seem burned out, man. Let's talk about it. That was I say
Yeah.
burned out. That was just like 2 years ago. Chip, you're dealing with current Chip, where Chip is like revitalized. He's doing Zdarsky
I
Comic News, working with Prana.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
right,
this is
baby. I
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
No, no, no. I mean, it's just like I think curiosity is like my number one driver. And when I think that was part of the reason why I stopped Sketch 1.0 is I no longer had that curiosity. All I had was tired.
Yeah. You know, I will say that has been a big motivator for me, and some of the big career moments, even a couple pretty recent. I don't want to talk about specifically, but like when you just say, I'm no longer charged up to do something new. I'm just tired. Like
Yeah.
that's when it's time to change. It's when it's time to shift.
Yeah.
Well, so you mentioned the ZCN deal that Prana is working on, and we're really early days on that. But if you're an advertiser and you're looking for some place to put your money, ZCN, I'm telling you, it's in comic shops. You should be looking at us. Give me a call.
I emailed Chip about it. I emailed Chip right after the first issue. Yeah, he sent me the first two like before they dropped, and I was just like, I want to be a part of this. And then I was like, I also have this, Adam. I have a very deep, dark secret. I am like, despite the fact I'm completely like the room I'm in is covered with books and art and stuff like that. I have a very hard time spending money on myself, and that includes my business. And like, I could afford it, but I was just like, I had a hard time rationalizing that. And I regret it every day because I know I'm never going to end up in ZCN because of that. Damn you, Chip.
What did you like? What did he offer to bring you in? What do you mean?
Oh no, I reached out about advertising, and like he sent me the rates, and they're completely reasonable. But I had a really hard time pulling that trigger, and then it just hasn't worked out yet. But I mean, Chip's rates at that point, I have no idea. I don't know what you turned them into, you damn monster.
I've just got started. I haven't changed anything yet.
but anyways, yeah. If I was going to advertise anywhere, it would be ZCN, both because it'd be fun and because I actually think it's a genuinely good thing.
Well, so for those of you who are listening to this, and sometime in February of next year, when we announce the sketched ZCN mashup, you'll know where this started.
I just want Chip to draw me like one of your French girls, Chip.
The newest
Please don't draw me naked, Chip.
Is Chip making out with Chip as Batman? That's the next cover. I can say this because it'll be out in a little while.
He also shared Chip on his Substack.
Oh, good. Excellent. Yes.
Yeah.
So this actually completely dovetails into what I wanted to talk about next. And it's something that I mentioned to you earlier. My fascination with how the comics press, aside from a few of you sort of torch holders, really has died, right? There was a time when you had Multiversity, you had CBR, you had Newsarama, all of these places that were dynamic and exciting, and they had community. And if you were a publisher and you went to them and said, hey, I want to do an exclusive with this, whatever, it would move the needle. Like it would legitimately change sales. Now it's so difficult to find a place to put your resources and put your time. Part of the reason why I got involved with Chip is because it is a perfect example of some place that you can put your time and resources and actually reach consumers. I guess, as someone who has maintained that flame and has been through all of it, like, where do you think all of that went wrong? Or do you even agree with me that it went wrong, that it died,
I think it went wrong, but also I don't think it went wrong because comics. I think it is more a reflection of the way that the internet as a whole has went, and I think it has a lot of complexity to it. Social media plays a big part. Algorithms play a big part. Way that Google search works now is playing a huge part right now. The desire for companies to buy all kinds of small things and then close those things once they're not immediately as profitable as you expect them to be, or to just basically destroy them in the process. I mean, look at CBR. You said CBR was gone. I mean, you didn't say CBR was gone, but it's just no longer what it is. It still exists. It's just no one cares. No one cares. And I say that with respect because there's a lot of people who are putting a lot of work into it for not very much money. And the thing is like, this is not a comics only problem. This is the thing I say a lot, Adam. So many problems in comics are not comics exclusive. They are societal, economic, industry. They're just very broad problems that are reflective of overarching things. And what's happened with comic sites in particular is very, very reflective of that. I mean, we talked about sports earlier. There are so many sports sites and so many sports writers that cannot exist or cannot find work in this day and age, despite the fact that they're really talented. I mean, ESPN got rid of my number one influence as a writer is Zach Lowe, who is an NBA writer who used to write for Grantland, then wrote for ESPN for a long time. Right before the season, despite the fact that he has a very popular podcast and is probably the most, actually not probably, he's the most beloved NBA writer of this time, they laid him off. And so they could give Stephen A. Smith $120 million over 6 years to yell at people on TV about LeBron being a baby or something. And so it really, I think it speaks a lot to like cultural shifts, but I also think it speaks to a lot to technological and economic shifts. I think the comics press, like when I started in 2009, and the big names then were Comics Alliance, CBR, Newsarama, and assorted others, but those were probably the big three. Like CBR and Newsarama were the big guns, and Comics Alliance was a mix of big guns but amazing taste. Like they were the ones that you really wanted to end up on. They were the tastemakers. In Comics Alliance, when I still remember this day where I was when I was going when I found out Comics Alliance closed. I was going to a fantasy football draft in a extremely sketchy poker den in Anchorage, Alaska, where I would do my drafts every year. But anyways, and so I remember that because it was that was a moment. Like people talk about how Comics Alliance and things like Comics Alliance don't exist anymore, but it was also really a line in the sand of when I think that was the moment things started breaking. And it's because I don't know the ins and outs of why Comics Alliance actually closed, but really, like, you can like look at Heidi's article about why Sketch closed, and a lot of it really comes down to that. People like there's just not enough money to support the work, and there's only so long you can be a volunteer who does this work before you burn yourself out. There are so many people who are amazing at writing. Like Oliver Sava, I think, is just one of the best comics critics we have. And Oliver didn't really have a place to write for years. Like AV Club is now back and he's writing like one article a month. But at the same time, if we were living in a world that really supported the comics press, Oliver Sava should have like basically a blank check to write whatever he wants. And he would motivate people to read that stuff because he's great at it. Zainab Akhtar moved on to doing Shortbox, and she was one of the best comics critics there was. A lot of people just moved into other spaces because they wanted to, or because there just wasn't space for them. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of really great work. Honestly, I think a lot of the best work has moved into podcasting, and I think a lot of the stuff, I think part of it is about like people shifting to other mediums. Like there's a lot of, I mean, a lot of publishers are working really closely with like TikTok and Reels influencers, which has been interesting to see. But then also beyond that, there's so many YouTubers. I'm not a YouTube person, and I think a lot of it is just kind of weird, but I know some people absolutely love it. And it's part of it, I think, is a shift away from just sites, but also I think comics press has the comics press world has really struggled because of a whole lot of things outside of their control. And like I have a lot of sympathy for it. I think I was lucky. I want to say I was smart, but I'm going to say I was lucky. I switched my model before all the really bad stuff started happening, before banner ads stopped being useful, before you had to like have 64, 320 by 50 placements on your website, on your front page of your website, just to like actually exist. I mean, you had Rich Johnson on the podcast. I say this with love, Rich. I go on your website and my computer commits suicide because there's so many video ads. It's like all of a sudden there's like 7 video ads on my computer at once. I'm like, I can't handle this. But like that's the
Yeah.
thing is like you have to do that to survive with that model, and nobody wants to engage with articles that are inundated with that many ads. And so I was
Yeah.
lucky to get ahead of that with my subscription model. Um, and yeah, but yeah, I hate to be boring, but a lot of it just comes down to money and opportunity, and like there just isn't much of it anymore. And I think that there's probably an interest in it. It's just how do you activate that and keep it going and making it sustainable? I don't know. I mean, what's your take on this? I'm curious.
I think that it's interesting because my fascination, my lifelong, my career fascination has been with direct market comic shops, which buck a trend. Like there is this like in very serious trend in brick and mortar where everything else is dying over the last 20 years. Independent bookstores and all indie brick and mortar has really suffered as far as like store counts go. And yet last 18, 19 years, best I can get data, comic shops have not gone up or down in store count plus or minus 4% in that time. So like when I look at larger societal things, like comics does tend to buck that trend. Comics, there's no reason why people should be still going to comic shops to buy ink on paper. When we were told, without any question that 20 years ago that everything was going to go digital and you're going to read everything on your iPad. Like there's no reason for all of this to work. So part of me is like looks at what you're talking about and saying, yes, but why did weed go that way?
Mm-hmm.
Like I look at how there was a time when reviews were incredibly important. You would really, I remember being at Valiant and like crowing about the best reviewed company in comics. And you
Mm-hmm.
could do that, right? There was an aggregator that would allowed you to do that. Like so I look at that but now reviews, as far as I can tell, don't really have any sales effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no one reviewer that you get on there and they give you 5 stars and you see a bump. So I look at all of that and I wonder if there's any way for us to do like kind of reverse that trend outside of the societal thing. And I don't know. I hope that we get into a place where we're so fed up that we just kind of take things off and start siloing them. I look at
Mm-hmm.
next week, as I'm recording this, next week, we're going to be releasing an episode with Jason Blanchard, who works in cybersecurity, and they've just started a comics publisher that we've been helping them with. And
Fascinating.
it is really, I can't wait to share it with you. But they have this incredible community in the cybersecurity world where they built on Discord. They have over 100,000 people on these Discords, like 5,000 active daily users. And we're not talking about a massive community, especially when you compare it to something like comics, which has decades and decades and decades of fan building. So when I see that, I think maybe there's a point at which we just get fed up.
Yeah.
Right. And we say, fuck you, Jeff Bezos, fuck you, Zuckerberg. We're going to go do our thing over here. I hope that that's where we land, because as a marketer, I need those platforms. I need those places where I know I can get attention. So
I think
I'm hopeful.
I mean, honestly, I think that a big part of it is like, so when you were at Valiant, the funny thing is I actually, before I interviewed you for Sketch, I actually looked back and I was looking at interviews with you, and one of the ones was something I did. I used to run a column about Valiant, and I talked to 5 people from the Valiant team, and you were one of the 5. It was Dinesh Shamdasani, Fred Pierce, Hunter Goranson, you, and a 5th person whose name, Warren Simons. It was all 5.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I cannot believe I pulled that off the top of my head. Good job, me. Boom.
Yeah, that was the original crew. That was like the leadership, if you were. Yeah.
I was in my old apartment then. I remember doing that interview. But back when you were at Valiant, though, when you crowed about that stuff, let's say you posted it on Twitter, you could rely on that tweet driving people to, let's say, CBR to read that review about, let's say, The Valiant, a comic that I thought was amazing. The Valiant was a great comic.
It was.
Driving people there. Next thing you know, people are like, I got to check out this crazy comic from Jeff Lemire and Matt Kint and Paulo Rivera. And then they go do that. And so like there was a predictable path from action to readership to activation to some degree.
Yeah.
Now it's like, is anyone going to see the post? Are they going to even actually be able to click on it because like they're like, basically all links are neutered to some degree? Then will they actually go and read it? There's all these different breaking points in like the pathway to like raising awareness and creating action. And the thing is a lot of people have just moved to like kind of posting on social media because they want to keep people on the walled garden. And the problem is like keeping people on the walled garden is not useful from a marketing perspective for the most part. For
100%.
But for Comics Press, the same is true. Is like, here's a truth about me, and I probably shouldn't admit it, but I don't care. I never look at any data for my own stuff ever, never. I don't look at Google Analytics. I don't look at my downloads. I don't look at anything ever.
Never.
And it doesn't mean
number
anything.
Of subscribers, you don't look at it all. Yeah.
Nope.
No.
It doesn't mean anything to me. And the thing is like, I know that some people would like obsess over their social media engagement and stuff like that. And like, I do look at subscribers for Sketch, but the thing is there is zero correlation between social media engagement and the number of people who subscribe to Sketch. Here's an example. I wrote this article. It was called Pizza with All the Extras. It was a story behind the 1993 promotion Marvel did with Pizza Hut about the X-Men, and where I talked to the people from Marvel and some of the artists that worked on it about the story behind how this thing happened, because it was such like a massive moment in that time where people were literally just going nuts to get their Pizza Hut because they wanted the X-Men stuff with Joe Madureira art and Jim Lee and stuff like that. And it had thousands and thousands and thousands of engagements on social media. I was getting emails from people I never heard from. It was open to non-subscribers. It generated one subscription.
What?
Yep. And then I've had very niche articles that are so me that make no sense, and they've generated dozens of subscriptions with almost no social media engagement. That's the thing is like, I think part of the problem with the Comics Press is from the Comics Press side, I do think that people become overly obsessive with accepted formulas of how you do things. Again, I said news, reviews, previews. I think that constant churn is like something that people focus on from a Comics Press standpoint, because that's the way everybody does it. You just do a template, and that's what works. But the thing that like the problem is there's no differentiation in there. And if you want to differentiate and you want people to come and enjoy your stuff, you have to do something different. And I say this with love, but like a good example of that is The Beat. Like The Beat does a lot of really interesting stuff, but like the things that really generate traction for them is like Heidi going ham, Heidi doing something like the recent deep dive that she did about The Big Lie. That's the thing that gets people talking. That's what drives people to the website. That's what generates the energy. But you don't get that same energy for just like an average review. And I think it's at least in part because people have been super served with that material over the years, and you kind of develop blindness even beyond all the algorithmic nonsense that keeps it down, if that makes sense.
No, 100% that makes sense. But how do you navigate that as a marketer? I think that's really the big question, because what you're saying, and it tracks with everything that I've seen as well, is it's the genuine moments. It's the people that are coming at this really passionately. Like our biggest as far as traffic goes, our biggest interview so far has been with the couple who run Titan Comics for like, they've been together now something like 40 years or something, and they have been in comics retail their entire time. I never would have guessed that in doing all of this that any of the bigger executives or any of the people we've had on this past year, that those two would have been the traffic driver. And they did. They increased our subscriptions like way higher than anybody else. Does that? But it comes from that very genuine, like human interaction, that connection moment where you're passionate, like you saying the things that intrigue you are the things that build your audience. But how do you industrialize that? Or maybe the answer is we can't. Maybe the age of industrialization is over. Like We
Do you
don't.
mean from
Is
a
there
comic
no
site
model?
standpoint, or do you mean from like
Yeah,
a just broader comics? Well, I mean, the comic thing, I think it's interesting. Like, I think there's some really great efforts out there. Like, do you know comic book couples counseling?
yeah, I do. They
Yeah,
have a great,
their
great
podcast,
podcast.
Brad and Lisa Gullickson, they are so good at like cultivating a fan base and activating that fan base. And like they just came out with a new logo that had combined the work of letterer Hassan Otsman El Howe and the art of Jesse Lonergan. And like they were posting pictures of people wearing logo wear. And like if I made a logo or if I made a shirt, people would just be like, why do I want a shirt from the guy that's obsessed with Stiltman? But they've developed that type of audience. And like that's the type
Yeah,
of thing that they do. And I think that like they're a perfect example of like kind of the counter programming that I've been talking about a number of times, where it's like
yeah.
there's a lot of interview shows out there. There's a lot of podcasts that are people just like talking about the weekly releases. But instead, like they talk about like literally comic book couples. They do interviews that are more about themes and like humanity and who they are as people and who the creators are as people. They talk about themselves at length. People get to know them. You get invested in them. And I think that like that is I don't know. It's like it's easy for me to say this. It's easier to say things like this than it is to do this. But I think we're in an age where people want to see the people that they're reading or listening to or like watching and know who those people are rather than just execute a formula that was popular 14 years ago. And like
Yeah,
I think that
yeah.
that's the first step. And I think in trying to activate that is like you can't activate a flavor that is already over delivered on, if that makes sense.
No, 100%, 100%. I think that does track too. Again, going back to Jason Blanchard and Recca Publishing, like Black Hills, their cybersecurity firm, like they're I think something like a near $1 billion company, and they don't do any advertising.
Mm-hmm.
It is all about give, 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 and then remind you that we also sell this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's just them giving of themselves and who they are. And they're very honest about who they are. And they like teach people all of this stuff for free. And like all of this is, it does jive with this model that I'm seeing working. But man, it's so difficult to do when you're trying to like
I
work,
know.
you're trying to build a business plan, how do you do
Yeah.
that?
How do you build a business plan around vibes? Not very easy. I do want to say Tiffany Babb, she did the Comics Courier this year.
Yeah.
She did Popverse and Panel by Panel, won an Eisner Award there. And then
Yeah.
she did like the print comics criticism newspaper, literally newspaper. And that did incredibly well on Kickstarter. And like I think that kind of goes back to it. Yeah, I mean I think it's
I backed it. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's valuable to kind of zig while others are zagging. And again, easier said than done, hard to business plan. It's hard to succeed on just vibes. As somebody once said in a meeting when I worked at that GCI company you brought up earlier, and then was later said by Henry Cavill in a Mission Impossible movie, which really made my day when I was watching that. Hope is not a strategy. And hope is not a strategy, but at the same time, I do think it's a good foundation.
It is. I mean, it is something that we all are ready to buy, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are ready to spend on hope. That's for certain. Where do you think comics is going? 2025. You're going to be for one of our first episodes of the year. Where do you think comics is going in the upcoming year? What do you think the changes are going to look like?
Comics in general, or in the
just the
press?
comics industry in general. Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's
you can talk about press if you'd like, but I'd love to like, kind of the overall.
I think the biggest question, and by the time that this podcast goes up, it's entirely possible we're going to have an answer. Is I mean, a lot of it will depend on tariffs, man.
100%.
And like I think that I'm doing an article that will probably be up by now, where I'm talking to comic publishers about balancing today and tomorrow. And I've talked to a few so far, and every one of them has brought up tariffs without even me asking about it. It is very clear that the comic industry is horrified about the possible impacts of that, very understandably. It turns out that a lot of comics are published or printed not here, and it turns out that a lot of the
Shocking.
materials that they get to print said things are created not here, and that
Yeah.
if you put 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and 10% tariffs on China to start with, that is going to be very bad for everyone involved, and it will affect everyone in the entire chain. So until that question is answered, and again, it may be answered by the time this goes up, I think it's impossible to say what 2025 has in store, because that could mean comic prices go up even further. You think you're unhappy with $4.99? Meet $6.99, baby. I mean, think about it. If you're in Australia, my God, you already have, like, it's already way more expensive for you. You're going to spend like $12 for one Marvel comic. 12 Australian dollars. Good Lord. And so it's going to, I mean, like, that could have just genuinely catastrophic impacts on everyone involved. And I think that is far and away the number one story for 2025, and it's hanging over the industry like a guillotine. And like, I'm sure you've talked to people. People are trying to get as far ahead of this as they possibly can. Like, print, baby.
But how? Yeah, well, yeah, and that's
comic creators.
I did this back in 2022, 2023. We saw the paper crisis coming because they couldn't get Canadian paper mill workers to I saw this early, and I told all my clients, print as much as you can right now.
Yeah.
Like, print it, have it sitting in a warehouse, because this is coming. And sure enough, it did. And that was just people wouldn't go to paper mill, couldn't go to work at paper mills.
Right.
Imagine now, like, that paper just is that much more expensive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're very smart. Like, if anybody who is smart enough to be, in this world, is trying to get things printed well ahead of January 5th. So
yeah,
who knows? No one really knows. And that's just it. The paper. We're talking about ink on paper. The ink comes from one place that's not here. The paper comes from one place that's not here.
I don't want to make, I don't want, I mean, I know you've gone down this sort of path before. I don't want to be overly political necessarily on this, because I know it's your show and everything, but it is really fascinating. Like, Rich Johnson ran a collection of people in the industry talking about tariffs. And it was really fascinating to see the people who, were Trump voters, basically, like, trying to rationalize that he's not really going to go through the tariffs, and it's just a negotiating thing. There's no way he'd do this. And I'm like, what about that guy suggests he wouldn't do that? Not much. And so it's just like, it's interesting to see, like, people who, voted for him already trying to, like, rationalize to themselves that I didn't make a mistake voting for him. He's not going to do that. He wouldn't hurt me like that. And he absolutely would. And the comics industry will spend the entire year trying to figure out where they fit in all that.
I will say that as a result of the first Trump election, when I was very vocal. In fact, I think it was on Rich Johnson ran a video of me being a protester at one point. I refuse now to say one way or the other where my political leanings lie, but I will say that one of the things that has become obvious to me is that the difference between Trump voters and not Trump voters typically depends on whether or not you believe what he says.
Right.
Right. The non-Trump voters seem to believe everything he says, and the Trump voters seem to believe what they think he says. So it's what they think he means by what he says. And I don't know. I find that fascinating. Is that I don't know. We'll talk about marketing. What a brilliant marketer Donald Trump is. He has really done an amazing job of building community around, buttons that have been there for decades, hundreds of years.
I have a governing theory to the world, the way that the world works these days, and it's 3 words. And it's very stupid, so I apologize in advance, but it brings us full circle to the other things I've talked about. Everything is sports. Everything is sports now. Jerry Seinfeld had a bit back in the day that was said, like, you're rooting for laundry. That's what everything is anymore. Like, political, it's not that, like, it's like being a Yankees fan. It has nothing to do with rational truth. Like, you lost Juan Soto, who gives a shit? Like, you're still a Yankees fan. Juan Soto is missing out. you're voting for this candidate, you're ride or die. It doesn't matter what that person says. Like, you are a Marvel fan, you love and hate them more than anyone. That is the way of the world these days. I mean, you can see it on how like things like this are covered. And like, not in comics case, that is even true. Like, a lot of the most popular YouTube shows are seemingly based on like incendiary takes. I mean, a lot of podcasters
100%.
are. It's like, it's easier. I was offered to move to, I'm not going to say what, but I was offered to move to, let's say, I was offered to move Sketched and Off Panel to somewhere else for a sum of money, and I declined. And part of it was I didn't like what happened to people that ended up there. It resulted in them becoming more extreme, and I was not interested in being extreme. But like, part of the everything in sports thing is it rewards extremes, and I'm a mild boy in an extreme world, Adam, and that's a tough time. But you know what? I'm doing my best to make it work.
I always feel like I would do better if we, especially in promoting us, if I was a better pundit. Like if I was better at the hot take. Instead, I'm like, but on the other hand, yeah. So
Yeah,
I understand. But all of that's so. All right, here's a common question that I have, and it feels like we're cycling towards the end, because otherwise we're cycling towards the end. Feels like you and I are. This is we can see the end of both of what we both do for a living off in the distance. But all that said, right? All that doom and gloom, that sort of Damocles hanging over our head. What gives you hope in regards to comics? What causes you to keep this going, even though, like, say, everything falls to shit in 2025?
comics are awesome. I hate to be really like simple about it, but I mean, look around me. I mean, you can see. I don't know how people watch this on video, but it's just, I am in a room of my own enthusiasm, and I'm in a room of my passions. And right to my left is a massive stack of books that I went through with my buddy Brandon yesterday on my end of the year podcast, where we counted down our 20 favorite comics. And if I really want to talk about all my favorite comics, that list would have been like 100 plus long, because there's so many good comics. And I also think, here's the thing that gives me hope. I think people position the world of comics as adversarial in way too often. Manga versus comics, webtoon versus comics, all this stuff. Do you know what webtoon is? Do you know what manga is? They're comics. And you know what's great
100%.
about that? It means that an entire new generation is being trained to love comics. And if people love comics and you got great comics, you just have to find a way to get them to discover you, and they might love your comic. And so much of what the comic industry, but really any entertainment medium needs, is they need a foot in the door. Comics they have 2 feet in the door. Manga is huge. Webtoon is huge. How do you convert that audience? That is a massive question, but you can ask that question and you can come up with a definitive argument that is possible. And they've already solved half of the problem, which is, do we have something good to sell them? You do. Make it happen. And I think that's what gives me hope. There is a massive potential audience that people just sleep on because they think it's adversarial. It's not comics versus manga. They're all together. And I think that that's great. So yeah, what gives me hope? I never lack hope. I know that I may have seemed nihilist about a lot of this stuff. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't love it. I'm curious because there's so much to this world. You know what was a big deal for me in 2024? I started reading way more manga. You know what was awesome? Manga. And there was like 3 books in my top 20 that were manga, which has never happened before. But that really speaks to the breadth and the connectivity of the medium as a whole. And I think when people start recognizing that they're not adversarial but complementary, I think we're all going to be a lot better off.
Amen. Where can people find more of David Harper? Because there is so much of you to find out there. I would love for them to dig in as deep as I have.
Oh, you can find me in Anchorage, Alaska, covered in cats. Okay, so I'm on Sketched at sketch.com. I feel like I should say this. The Eisner losing Sketch.com. I lost this year. Boo, but that's okay. So Sketch.com is my subscription comic site where I basically every week I have 2 regular columns that I write. I have a podcast that goes up, and I at least have 1 feature every week. Most of the time it's 2 because I hate sleep. Off Panel is the podcast that goes up every week. It's my weekly comics interview podcast. By the time this comes up, I'm very close to a big anniversary. June 15th, I think it is, will be the 10th anniversary of Sketch and the 10th anniversary of Off Panel. And right around then, I'll be hitting the 500th episode of Off Panel. I'm already trying to book my 500th guest. A guest in my 500th episode. Anyone who listens to the podcast can guess who it is. I have a long running white whale. It's Jim Lee. And I'm trying very hard to make it happen. And so I'm trying to do something special for it. I have some designs on things that I could do for it. TBD on if I do that, because it sounds like a lot of work, and I just want to chill and play Marvel Rivals. Just kidding, I'm gonna do that. But yeah, and then I'm on for as long as these platforms last, I am on Blue Sky and I'm on Instagram, and I post sketch stuff on Twitter, but I don't use Twitter anymore because it is hell on earth. That's where you can find me.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. And how would they find you?
One more thing. Patreon. Off Panel has a Patreon, which is separate. People often think that it's connected. It's not. Off Panel has a Patreon, which I created to fund that, and that's part of the reason why it's not paywalled. Is I have many people who thankfully support what I do on Patreon, and patreon.com/offpanel, sketch.com, and I'm at David Harper on Blue Sky, and at Sketched on Blue Sky, and at Sliced Fried Gold on Instagram, and at Sketch Comic on Instagram. Man, I gotta be consistent with this stuff. People need to stop stealing my names, man.
Trust me, we're Prana DM some places, Prana DMS some places. I'm Adam Bang Freeman some places. I totally feel you. I've never been consistent about that, which is a failing of mine. But
that's
anyway,
okay.
David, I've been looking forward to this interview, and you absolutely delivered. Thank you so much. This was a really good time. I feel like, was there any questions you wanted to ask me before we bring this thing in for a landing? Because I don't know. I feel like you didn't get an opportunity to like reciprocate as much as you felt like you were going to.
No, I don't know. I mean, there was some that kind of came up in the moment, but I decided to not try to hijack your podcast. That would be a terrible thing to do.
Well,
maybe next time.
We'll hold it for maybe the next one.
Yeah.
This has been wonderful. Thank you, buddy. This is my name is Adam Freeman. This has been Comic Industry Insiders. And I've been told I should have some sort of call to action at the end of these things, like, like and subscribe. And it always feels weird. So I don't know. Only. Maybe comment. 5 stars only. There you go. 5 stars only. All right. I love it. Thank you, buddy. Really appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon. And namaste, y'all.